thought today might be a good time to have Michael Stavropoulos come up to the microphone. Because he's like the second son of the monastery. Honestly, if it wasn't for Jessica, I think he would be over there all the time. So he loves the monastery, and he is very close to them there. And so we said, hey Mike, why don't you come and do the initial introduction of Father John today? And he said yes. So Michael, would you like to come and do the introduction?
Thank you, Presbytera. Fear not, I'm not tonight's speaker. Like St. John the Baptist proclaimed, there is one coming after me who is far greater than me. So too this evening's talk will be offered by someone very capable. He has the insight, knowledge, and intellect to articulate the teachings and life of Father Roman Braga. I was blessed to know Father Roman for 25 years. Around 12 years ago, when he could no longer confess, he insisted I and my family start confessing with this evening's speaker. Father John Konkle has been our family's spiritual father for 10 years. In the course of that time, mostly through small talk, I've learned he's quite an athlete. Every time the kids would talk about sports, for example, Goya, basketball, he would say, oh, I used to teach basketball. He was an active athlete and he taught basketball, tennis, and downhill skiing. He even taught a class on first aid to the new recruits in the ski patrol in Houghton, Michigan, where he did his undergrad in mathematics at Michigan Tech. I think he also played varsity golf, but I don't think he taught golf. He, Presbytera Anna, and their two sons, Jeremiah and Jared, love to cook. Recently, in a forum not unlike this, Father John, he stated that he caramelized onions for 9 hours for a family reunion. The Konkle family loves outdoors, they love nature and hiking. And Father John, for a time when he was in college, was a hiking guide at Isle Royale National Park. Father John has earned his PhD in philosophy from Princeton University. He later taught philosophy for 10 years at Dartmouth College in New Hampshire. Father John is from Western Greece, approximately 5,300 miles west of Athens is Albion, Michigan, where he grew up. His academic and professional career took him to northern Michigan, to Princeton, New Jersey, to New Hampshire, even out to California, and finally to Yonkers, New York, where he studied theology at St. Vladimir's Theological Seminary. In August of 2009, Father John and Presbytera Anna found themselves in a thriving metropolis, Rives Junction, Michigan. Population 3,170. It is here at the Dormition of the Mother of God Orthodox Monastery that Father John is the resident priest and spiritual father to a community of holy nuns from a Romanian background and tradition. It is here in Rives Junction, some 25 miles northeast of where he grew up, that Father John served side by side with Father Roman for nearly 6 years. All this is to say that in all these achievements, what I remember most about Father Roman and his insistence that we start confessing to Father John had nothing to do with the above. On more than one occasion, both Father Roman and Father John would express to me and my family the importance of bringing our children to confession at a very early age. Father Roman would say, Oh, the children, they come and talk with me, and they tell me a story, and they tell me that they stole a bubble gum. And they would be ashamed, and I told them that's good. But I also told them that there's no sin that you can do that is greater than the love of God. Father John would share with me that if your children don't have a good understanding of confession at an early age, when they are older and in trouble, it'll be very difficult for them to turn to the church for guidance. My last confession with Father Roman, he said to me, he said, go to Father John, you and your family. He is a very good priest. He will be a good confessor. He is loving, humble, and pastoral, and he will be good for you and your family. Several times over the last decade, each of our children on numerous occasions have said to us, can we go and visit Father John? I have to talk with him. He has always been available to us to listen and to offer a word. By God's grace and through Father Roman's example and prayers, Father John has been and continues to be exactly how Father Roman described him. He is a very good priest. He is a very good confessor. He is loving, humble, and pastoral. Please join me in welcoming tonight's speaker, Father John Konkle.
Some of what Michael said was true. Some. Let's see. So anyways, thank you. It's good. It's a joy to be here, fathers and Presbyterian. Thank you for inviting me. It's it will seem strange to you, but it's a delight just for me to be in a parish. And after 16 years, it's kind of strange. When I go to a parish, I always think I know what it's going to be like. And it's like, oh, it's just different living with nuns than it is seeing people. So, just sort of being here is a great joy and delight to me. And the really, by far, the greatest joy that I have is telling Father Roman stories. And by far, the greatest dislike I have is giving talks. And so, somewhere between two of those, hopefully something will percolate in your hearts and the stories will win out over my dislike for talks. Yeah, actually, Michael mentioned this, but probably a lot of you have met Father Roman. How many of you had met? Just like show of hands. Yeah. You just met Father Roman at some time in your life. Yeah. Not as many as I thought, but still, yeah, good. And had relationships with him that I never had for a longer period of time. I knew him for 6 years. Never went to confession with him. Father Paul and I were speaking before the service tonight about sometimes it's not how long you spend with somebody, it's just the nature of the encounter. It's just a single encounter with someone can totally change your life. I'll tell you a couple of those stories tonight. I think in overview, the way that I would describe Father Roman is as follows. I've been at Dormition Monastery for about a year and a half or so. I received an email from a former philosophy student that was probably, hadn't talked with her in 6 or 7 years, but she emailed me and said, why are you a Christian? And she had come to lots of my courses when I taught philosophy, and we'd gone through lots of philosophical discussions of these matters, but I had been out of philosophy for a while, and I paused for a long time, days, before I responded to her email, because I don't want to simply kind of re-enter that philosophical argument framework, and she was obviously, this was not in the classroom, this was a genuine and serious question. And what came to me after many days of reflecting on it, I wrote her an email that said, this will seem strange to you, but I'm a Christian because I live in a community that has a man, and when I watch him, I see the gospel. For the first time in my life, I've seen the gospel in the flesh. I've seen a man who loves his enemies, and it's unmistakable. I've seen a man who has a peace that the world could not possibly give. I live day in and day out with a man who has joy that the world cannot take away, no matter how hard it tried, and it tried hard to take his joy away. I live with a man who doesn't prepare what to say and is always ready to say something. And it's the right thing at the right time. And I went on, and this was absolutely true, and I have no idea what she thought of that reply, but that was a turning point for me. A profound turning point. I'm so thankful that she had asked me that question, because it made me stop and articulate to myself that this gospel's to be lived. It's to be enfleshed. It's to be incarnated. And it was such a gift and a privilege for me to really see it. And that's what the saints are for us. The saints are the instantiation of the gospel. And so the things I have to say about Father Roman, really, for me, they're all just instances of how it is that I saw what I read in the scriptures manifest, not written down in a book, but lived in the most delightful and joyful and exciting way. So I'm going to mostly tell stories, but I'm going to tell them in three time segments. I'll divide Father Roman's life into three unequal time periods, and tell you a few stories that I have from him about each period. And I'm going to try to emphasize two themes. I'm going to tell you what those are, because I usually lose sight of what I'm trying to do in my stories, and so you can know what I'm trying to accomplish. One is Father Roman's focus on the inner life. He's sort of famous for the phrase, exploring the inner universe. And so some of the stories will relate to that. And the other aspect is the external life, the way in which the external life flows from the inner life. And so some of the stories will talk about how this inner life gets manifest in the world in really the most simple of ways. If you want a greater account of his life and history and things like that, a year ago was published a biography of him called Journey to Simplicity. I saw it on the book, in the bookstore out here. So that's quite a thorough and detailed account. I'm a storyteller, I'm not a historian, so I don't do that sort of thing. Yeah. So so that's Father Roman. That's sort of the classic picture of him. So he was born in 1922, and the first period the three periods, 1922 to 1948, 26 years training, education, development, okay? And then 1948 to 1968, 20 years of persecution and surveillance and harassment. We'll talk about that. And then 1968 to 2015 at his repose is life in the West, 4 years in Brazil and the rest of his time in the United States. And so those the three segments: education, persecution, and life in the West. Life to the Americas is how I think of it. He was born in Romania, but it's now, the town he was born in is in Moldova. It's sort of in the northeast section of what Romania was at that time. And the eighth of 8 children, one adopted, his adopted brother and one other brother became monastics. His sister, who was the next oldest in him, he's the youngest in the family, became Mother Benedicta, who's the foundress of our monastery. So 4 of the 8 were monastics. His mother wanted to be a monastic before she got married, but in obedience to her parents, she got married, and so she produced 4 monastics. She herself, Father Roman's family was going to immigrate to North America in 1928 when he was 6, and his father was in a car accident and tragically died a few months later. So it took him many decades before he finally made it to North America. They stayed there. But that allowed his mother, once Father Roman went off to school, his mother went and became a monastic with her sister, with Father Roman's aunt, or maybe it was his mother's aunt. Anyways, another relative. And so this is a pretty pious family. His mother knew the Psalter by heart. The town parish was a monastery. They didn't have a parish church. They just all went to the monastic community. They used to very long vigils in the middle of the night. His mother knew the hymns of the church by heart, and she would go around. She would go to sleep. Father Roman would say that she would go to sleep saying the Psalter, and then if she would wake up in the middle of the night, he would notice that she would start the Psalter where she had left off when she fell asleep. So when Father Roman and his siblings misbehaved, she would, when our kids were little, they had timeouts. I don't know if people still talk that way. Is timeouts a form of punishment? I don't know. Anyway, so this was the Romanian version of timeouts, but she had them read or read to them an akathist or read from the Psalms. And Father Roman told me that he said, well, you know, we didn't like it at first, but what we learned is that it was a lot nicer to be at peace than it was to be all riled up and rambunctious. Can you imagine that? Like a young child, 6, 7, 8 years old, saying, you know, I would rather be at peace. And that's because peace permeated the household. It emanated from her. It wasn't, let me tell you what to do even though I do it. It was woven into his mother's life and into the family life and into the monastic community. So it wasn't artificial or hypocritical or judgmental in any sort of way. 12 years, he was 7 years at home. He went to school at age 7 in the town school. And then at age 12, he goes off to what they call seminary. Might seem a little bit misleading to us, but it's junior high school at a monastery near the capital, near Bucharest, and so this training continued there. And a couple stories that he told me. I have to comment on them because they're so simple, but they've had such a profound impact on me. So one day Father Roman told me, out of the blue, I mean all of his stories, oh, there he is. That's the youngest known picture of him. And it's probably, he was 12 or 13. It seems like it was taken at Cernica, the monastery that he studied at near Bucharest. Yeah, Father Roman basically trained me by stories. I guess I should step back a second and say there was another priest who was often at the monastery back in 2009, 2010. He came to me one day and said, isn't Father Roman training you? I became a priest a month and a half before I came to Dormition Monastery, so I literally knew, I was even dumber then than I am now. And so I was making lots of mistakes, and this priest really wanted to be correcting me. But he felt kind of like he couldn't do that because I was under Father Roman's tutelage, and Father Roman never corrected me. The nuns never corrected me. They just prayed for me, I guess. I don't know. This is just so typical me. I'm way off on tangents, but we'll get back to the stories in a second. So this is a different story of stories. So I was there probably 4 or 5 months, and it was in the middle of the Vespers, and I messed up the dismissal. I don't know what I did. It's the kind of mistake I make regularly now. And everybody went off to dinner, and I went into the altar, and I literally wept for 20 minutes because I was so embarrassed and so ashamed, and this is never gonna work out, and they're gonna throw me out. And in the midst of all of that kind of sorrow, somehow God broke through and said, "The only one judging you is you." And I thought back over the previous 4, 5, 6 months, like nobody had been critical of me at all. But I was judged harshly for 5 or 6 months by what I thought they were thinking of me, but not by what they said at all. And so this was, again, a profoundly transitional point for me. I realized that the only one judging me was myself, and they were they just loved me. And so Father Roman taught me by stories, and they would come out in the middle of nowhere. They weren't attached or associated with anything. And so one day he told me, we're done with the services. We're starting to walk out of the place where we vest. And he said, well, you know, my mother taught me how to read. And I said, well, yeah, it's not too surprising. Okay, so your mother taught you how to read. And he said, here's how she taught me how to read. She would copy a psalm out in, handwritten. And she said, this is the word for God, Dumnezeu, Dumnezeule. And she said, I want you to find that word everywhere on the page. So Father Roman held out his imaginary paper and his imaginary pen when he's describing this. He's Dumnezeu, Dumnezeu, Dumnezeule, Dumnezeu. And then he held the imaginary paper back and he said, and that's how I learned that God is everywhere. That is literally, so I just want to let you know, that is the most profound story I have of Father Roman. Because the sum total of the Jesus prayer is that calling upon the name of Jesus makes Jesus present. That's the theology of the Philokalia. And in the presence of Jesus, passions and demons flee. And at the age of 4, Father Roman knew that the name of God meant the presence of God. And he understood that the reason that you don't use the name of the Lord your God in vain is because when you say God, God's present. That's amazing. And so literally, that's how I learned that God is everywhere. No distinction between the linguistic and the ontological, the reality. No distinction between language and reality. That's utterly amazing at the age of 4 or 5, whatever it is. Okay. Another story from if you read some of the things that he wrote and said in some of the talks online in different places, you see a lot of these stories have different versions. Some of the things might have happened multiple different times or different whatever, but these are the stories as I got them, okay? Which I take to be the canonical version, but yeah, so another time he told me a story. He said, on the first day of school, I had to go to school, 7 years old. They lived in the country, farmers, and cattle farmers, and my mom sent me off to school, and I had to walk several miles or kilometers into school, and she said I was terrified. He was absolutely terrified. Now, it was strange, because I'm sure he'd been on that road many different times with his family, and he knew the area and just like this. He said he got to school, he was fine all day in school, he had to walk back home, and he was terrified. He came into his mother and said, "Mother, I'm terrified. I'm totally just paralyzed with fear. Walking this road, walking on this road to school and back." His mother said, "Well, let's sit down and we'll memorize Psalm 26, verse 1. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the defender of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid?" So that afternoon, they memorized that verse. After dinner, before he went to bed, they practiced the verse a few more times. Next morning, got up, made his breakfast, practiced the verse a few more times, sent him on his way. Didn't walk with him, didn't send an older sibling with him, didn't say there's no bears in the woods, or, nobody's been attacked by a bear in 20 years, don't worry about it. No explanations, memorize this verse, say it on the way. He said, I said that verse to myself all the way to school, and I wasn't afraid. And then he said, and I've had to say that verse many times after that. And you can imagine, I don't know how much you know, I think we'll say a little bit, but the torture that he went through in communist prisons is beyond the pale. So you can imagine what he had in mind when he said that. And then those of you that know him, he had just such a bright smile, just radiant smile, and often his stories with me would end with this really bright smile. And he said, and there's sometimes I still have to say it even now. The scriptures never wear out. So I want to emphasize in this that when we think of fear, we are so inclined to provide material and psychological comfort to somebody. Our children are in the bed and they're afraid about the alligator under the bed. There's no alligator under here. That was just a story that we read. And, just say, take a look. I'm looking down here underneath the bed. See, I don't see any alligator down there. Why don't you peek over there? That's all material explanation. But big boys don't cry. They're not afraid of alligators. That's a psychological explanation. His mother had none of that. Go right straight to the spiritual answer. You're afraid? The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the defender of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? That's amazing. So from the very earliest days of his life, he was absolutely infused with the spiritual realm. No cheap material psychological substitutes, which we are so inclined to, so prone to, in our own life, trying to comfort ourselves, instead of looking to the critical, core, foundational aspects of Scripture that penetrate through all of that crusted self-help mentality, okay? To how it is that we really, I don't understand microphones at all, so if I go in and out, I'm okay.
They're online,
I'm what?
You're a little quiet online. Maybe you can move it a little bit.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so those are two stories from his youth. I could probably think of more, but yeah. So then he goes, age 12, he goes to seminary, studies in Bucharest in monasteries around the area. Goes to college, gets, this is his military pictures, 2 years in training for the military. This was a great cognitive dissonance for him because he was basically trained and grew up in these monasteries with a great emphasis on the Jesus prayer and different approaches to the Jesus prayer at the different monasteries. If you're familiar with the movement called the Burning Bush, that was actually started at Antim Monastery in Bucharest, and that's what he was a part of that group. He was originally one of the that would be misleading, but one of the participants, young participants in the Burning Bush movement, which was a mystical movement based on the Jesus prayer. And now Romania just canonized several of the people who were involved in that group. They're just this past year, they're glorified now. Colleagues of Father Roman, but really the tension for him when he was in the military was learning how to kill people. He never had to engage in combat, but you're learning how to shoot rifles, learning how to clean rifles, learning how to kill people. At the same time, he was learning the Jesus prayer and being woven into this theological subculture around Bucharest, and really some of the most famous people at the time in theological and spiritual reflections. And so he was really living in two worlds. It was very hard for him. He mentioned on several occasions. He got out, he was a school teacher, and was arrested, and also pursuing his he was first year in his PhD in 1948 when he was arrested. So it then starts the persecution years, 48 to 68. 48, first time he was arrested, I'll say something about it in a minute, but he's 5 years in prison, 5 years out, 5 years in prison again, actually 5 to 6 years in prison, and then 4 to 5 years out. Okay, so, and then we'll go into a few details in a minute, but that's how it was. And then when he was out, he was constantly under surveillance, and he was harassed, and just it was horrendous to sort of live under that suspicion, although nothing like the torture that he underwent. He was arrested for various reasons, but one was he was a school teacher, and the school teachers were expected to be informers to the Romanian CIA or KGB is called Securitate. So the Securitate expected the school teachers to inform on the children. So, do you pray at home? Do you have icons at home? And to ask those questions in subtle ways so that then you could the teachers could report to the Securitates, and the right people could be monitored in the right ways. And he refused to do that. He was also expected to teach communist, a materialistic view of the world, and he refused to do that. And he was a literature teacher, and literature's full of divine insights, and he just taught it the way it was, and so they didn't like that. But it came to a head on May Day of 1948 when it happened that year that Great and Holy Saturday fell on May Day, and the Soviets were going to have this gigantic celebration. And he and one of his fellow graduate students wrote a letter that said, basically to students, it was posted up around the school, and that said, this is Great and Holy Saturday. You can't have a celebration today. You got to keep the fast, and you got to prepare for Pascha. And the letter's available. I think it's in the back of the Journey to Simplicity book. I think it's written out there in full. And so there's, it seems, if we read it, it seems kind of innocent. But from the communist point of view, this was a complete affront. Okay, it was the church against the state, and the state would have nothing for that. So he was arrested and interrogated, and then imprisoned. First in a prison called Pitești. There were two prisons in Romania that were run by, they're all run by the communists, but that were psychological experiments from Russia. They were the only two prisons anywhere in the Soviet Union, in any of the states. where they did these psychological experiments. In Patesh, there were about 80 people. And if you're interested in what actually went on there, there's a book written by someone else called The Anti-Humans, and it describes in excruciating detail what went on in that prison. But Father Roman described it as they didn't want you to go crazy, they wanted you to stay on the edge of sanity and insanity. And they were basically just experimenting to what extent that they could change and manipulate people through these sort of psychological tortures of various sorts. And some of the things are really just kind of like not very pleasant to talk about. But the physical abuse, the mental and psychological abuse is just overwhelming. He knows many of the people who were martyred. He said in prison he saw that saints become sinners and sinners become saints. And you just can't predict. You just don't know how people are going to respond under this torture. The types of beating, up in the middle of the night, having to have mock communion liturgies, mock communion services, including feces and urine, and so the torture was just indescribable. After he was there for a bit, I can't remember now, a year and a half or something like that, I'm not sure. He was then sent to the Danube Delta, where there was all the work groups, and it was people died left and right in the Danube Delta, work groups that were there, prison camps that were there. And that's where he was also in the second imprisonment from 58 to 64. There were 50 people on a bunk, and they were tight so close together that when one person rolled, they all had to roll. And can you imagine trying to sleep like that? And it was all, again, just to sort of keep you in this sort of weakened state. You couldn't help, you wheelbarrow all of this dirt up around you. They were moving the dirt to expand the delta. And you couldn't help someone who was struggling, or else you would get beat for trying to help someone else. And so the big picture about, if there is a big picture about this time, is that he says that under the torture, he learned that the devil exists, but they also put him in solitary confinement. And he would always say, in solitary confinement, he would always say, no pencils, no books, no pencils, no paper. And so he was an intellectual, and like they took everything away from him. And he said that in solitary confinement, he learned that you either go inside or you go crazy. And so what he did is he learned to go inside, and when he went inside, he said he found himself, and then he found God. And so under the torture, he found that the devil existed, and in solitary confinement, he found that God existed. He encountered God. And of course, he was raised in this, like an almost ideal home and situation setting, but this was the experiential reality of all that. He'd been practicing the Jesus prayer for a long time, been reading theology books. He used to say this especially of Americans, but of all sorts of people. He said, these people, they're just a bundle of quotes. we read the church fathers, we have all the answers, we have a quote for everything. They're just a bundle of quotes, but it hasn't sunk in. He said of himself that when he entered prison, he realized that he was just a bundle of quotes. All of his theological training was a bundle of quotes. But it turned out he was very thankful for it, because he said that under that intense pressure, all of that would come back. All of that content that he had been given and learned and studied, including the practice of the Jesus prayer, now became a reality. That's when it got woven into his flesh during those years. And so this encounter with the self, and through the self encounter with God, if you don't go inside, you'll go crazy, and of which most of the people did. They tried to get people to blaspheme Christ, and he's one of the few people that never compromised. Of the 80, many died, many compromised and became traitors, and then they came back as guards or as sort of informants. They would go away, be trained, brought back in as prisoners who were really informants, and some went crazy. But he never blasphemed Christ. He never denied Christ. But he said that there were times, and one time in particular, when every fiber of his body wanted to deny Christ, and he was trying with all of his might to deny Christ so that he could relieve the torture, and he couldn't get his mouth to move. It was locked. And so he just God saved him from blaspheming because he knew his heart, or whatever reasons, I don't know. And so the intensity of that's unimaginable. He had lots of stories about the guards, but I think what I'll do here is just mention one Saturday morning when I was serving divine, in preparation for divine liturgy. I was doing the proscomede. That's the service the priest does before the church, before the liturgy starts, and you commemorate a bunch of names. And I finished proscomede, and he came over to me and said, well, you know, when you're doing proscomede, I go through and remember all of the people that God's used in my life. And he started naming people. He said, well, you know, there was my mother and my father, and he told me, and my siblings, and told me about them, and my school teachers, he named a few of those, and the people at the monasteries, he named a few monks, and this went on 3, 4, 5 minutes. You know, he's naming people, he's giving me categories of people, and they said, and then there were the guards. He started naming some of the guards. These were the people he was remembering in proscomede. These are the people that tortured him beyond description. And he said, and he remembered them with this joy. And he would say, we could have never experienced the spiritual life that we had without them. He said, God used them in our lives. He didn't want to go back. He didn't want to do it again. But he cared for them. He loved them. And he had this strange joy for them. And this tremendous sorrow. And he would often say things very much like Christ on the cross. Oh, God, forgive them. They didn't know what they were doing. And I think just like when I hear that in the gospel, what do you mean you didn't know what you're doing? Hammer, nails, pounding it in? Like, I don't understand that. I don't understand that in the gospels. I didn't understand it in Father Roman. But it was just like our Lord, or just like Stephen, the first martyr, the profound forgiveness of the people who had tortured him was so genuine, so pure, so complete, unmistakable. It wasn't superficial or perfunctory, or just quite amazing to me. After the first imprisonment, he got out. He was ordained a deacon and a monk. He became a monastic. He was transferred to monastic after the first imprisonment, and a deacon, served as a deacon. He was arrested the second time for corrupting the youth. Yeah, he was teaching St. Basil and St. Gregory the Theologian. And if the Securitate files are now available, and you can read, sure enough, right there it is. And the whole all of the Burning Bush movement was brought in and interrogated, and they were all sentenced to prison for 15 years, but they got out after 5 or 6 because information leaked to the West, and the West put pressure on Romania to let these people out. But so for teaching the church fathers, they were put in prison under this unbelievably harsh labor. He got out, and nobody wanted to get, nobody in the church, none of the priests, none of the bishops wanted to have anything to do with it, because, like, you're a troublemaker, you're going to get us in prison. Like, he finally found somebody who ordained him a priest and gave him a parish in Nowheresville. I mean, just like out in the middle, like, who's ever heard of this place? Okay. And he builds the church, and he loved to sing. He loved children. He loved Christmas carols. So what did he do? He started a children's choir. He had 100 people every Sunday night, 100 children every Sunday night, singing hymns of the church and singing carols. And all of their parents, he said, would be lined up across the back of the church, and half of them were Securitate. And he would explain, he wouldn't talk to the parents, he would explain the carols to the children, which is, of course, filled with theology. Here's what you're singing. And so he was given these theology lessons from carols to the children so that all of the adults could hear. This went on for a year and a half. He built 2 churches, but it was illegal to build new churches. And so anyways, he was just like, So in the middle of the night, they came and took him away. Just showed up. The Securitate just showed up one night in the middle of the night and said, we're going. And it turns out that his sister, Mother Benedicta, happened to be visiting him that night. And so they took her away too. And they took him to another, even greater Nowheresville, and he did the same thing in the next place. This is after the second imprisonment. This is mid-60s. And so finally he got called into the Patriarchate, Romania, and patriarch said, "We're sending you to Brazil. you were causing too much trouble, and so you're a thorn in our side." And so it was sort of pressured to. So he was exiled basically to Brazil. There was a couple Romanian parishes. There was somebody he was supposed to check up on, that is supposed to be an informant of, and so anyways, obviously he wasn't going to do that. But, so he went to Brazil. He was there for 4 years. There's some things to say about that, but I think we'll just pass over it for the sake of time. And then in 1972, he came to the States, to the Jackson area. Our diocese is headquartered outside of Jackson, a town called Grass Lake. And he was there for about 10 years, learning the language and helping out at the diocesan headquarters. Very involved in youth, because he just loved the youth and youth programs and teaching, and gave a lot of talks and things like that. There's a couple talks that he gave that are available on YouTube. And then he was a parish priest for a short time, 2 different parishes. That didn't resonate with him. I don't know the details for that. He told me many times, so it wasn't him to be a parish priest. I'm sure he did fine. I'm sure it's wonderful, but each one only lasted a couple of years. And then he went to Transfiguration Monastery, which is the mother monastery. That's in Pennsylvania, not too far from Pittsburgh, and that's the sort of the mother monastery of ours. That was started by Princess Ileana, who became Mother Alexandra. Started that monastery, and Father Roman's sister, Mother Benedicta, and 2 other nuns came over to help Mother Alexandra, and those 3 nuns then came to Michigan to start this Dormition monastery that I serve at. And Mother Benedicta reposed before I got there. I never met her, 2005. And Mother Apollinaria was the 3rd nun, and she just reposed this last November. And the one that's left is Mother Gabriela, our abbess, is the 3rd of the original 3. And she was by far the youngest when they all came over. So Father Roman was at Transfiguration Monastery till 87, and then came 89. Our monastery started in 87. The nuns came over first, and then Father Roman retired, I guess, and came to Dormition Monastery 89, and was there continuously till 2015. After the fall of communism in Romania, he twice went back to Romania, 92 and 94, and saw some of his old friends, and lots of, I don't think I'll start those stories, but those are really quite precious stories. So a couple stories about life for Father Roman in this country. So you have his training in the first period of his life, 26 years. It was really voluntary training. Then you have 20 years of sort of involuntary training. Nobody asked to go to prison. Nobody asked to be surveilled. Nobody asked to get taken out of your home in the middle of the night. So the trials and tribulations of God's training, the way that God trains us, So voluntary training, 26 years. Involuntary training, 20 years. And then sort of the apostle to the Americas, or the light to the Americas, and really a spiritual father. And spiritual father who had a word. The characteristic feature of the Desert Fathers is they have a word. Give me a word. And the examples of this are endless. I'm just going to try to rattle off a few without elaborating so you can get a feel for it. And then end with 1 or 2 longer ones. So one Saturday morning, a man came up to me after lunch, liturgy and then lunch, and he said, "Father Roman changed my life." And we were standing right here. And he said, "It was 10 years ago." And I love Father Roman's story. So I said, "Well, tell me the story. What happened?" He said, "Well, I came here 10 years ago. I'd never met Father Roman before. Didn't really know much of anything about him. I came here." He said, "I was raised in the church. I'd kind of fallen away, wasn't very interested in church things anymore. And Father Roman came up to me, didn't introduce himself, didn't say hello. He came up to me and said, 'I don't understand why people listen to music that makes them want to break things.'" And then he walked away. And this guy was very musically talented. And he said, "I knew at that very moment he was talking about me. I was listening to music that made me want to break things, that affected me, that changed me, that transformed me in ways that..." And that day he stopped. And he went and started taking courses in Byzantine music. And when he told me this story, which is now about 10 years ago, so it was 10 years before that when he started this journey. So 10 years ago, he was the lead or chief or whatever you say, cantor at a large parish in California. And so I saw things like that all the time. So in 2015, right when Father Roman was dying, oh boy, there's a really great story here, but it's a long one, so I'll leave that out next time. Mother Gabriela told me to go to the Holy Mountain. I said, Father Roman's dying. She said, yeah, go to the Holy Mountain. So I was actually in Constantinople, Istanbul, when Father Roman died. I went to the Holy Mountain for a month, and I was walking to a prodromu, a Romanian skeet, and the car stops and says, where are you going? I said, I'm going to Prodromu. He said, so am I. He's a monk. He said, where are you from? I said, from the United States. He speaks, good English, fine English. And I said, where are you from? United? He said, what state? Michigan. Michigan? I said, yeah, why is that a surprise? He said, well, I used to live in Chicago. He's a Romanian fellow. And so he started telling me stories. And I said, well, how did you get here? And he said, do you know Father Roman? And I said, well, yeah, I knew him, but he just died. And he was like in shock. And he had just died like a few days earlier. And he said, well, let me tell you my story. He was born in early years in Romania, came over probably early 20s or something like that to the United States, to Chicago, completely left the church, could care less about it, was kind of like anti-church, worked in construction in Chicago, but part of the Romanian community in some sense. And he kept hearing that this Father Roman was saying about Dormition Monastery, we're a monastery for Americans. We're not just for Romanians, this is an American monastery. And that drove this guy crazy. He could care less about the church, but this is a Romanian monastery, okay? And so he has a friend who comes to him one day and says, I'm going to go up to Dormition Monastery and go to confession to Father Roman. You want to come with me? And the guy says, yes, because I've got some things to tell him. And so Father Roman so this guy goes in to meet with Father Roman. Before he can get a word out, Father Roman tells him everything that he was going to say, but with unbelievable kindness and compassion. And then Father Roman said, you need to be a monastic. Go find a spiritual father and become a monastic. He went to Mount Athos and he became a monastic. Another story is a woman who was, I'm not sure she was born blind, but she'd been blind for a very, very long time. Walked into confession, Father Roman never said, before she got a word out, Father Roman starts basically just sympathizing about how difficult and how hard her life was, or the challenges that she faced. She came out just pouring with tears, and she said, that's the first time anyone's ever understood me. Isn't it amazing? So these stories go on and on and on, but I'll give you two more, and then we can discuss, talk, and some of you might have Father Roman stories. So when I first, my wife and I visited, we were back in Michigan visiting our families from New Hampshire, November, December of 2008. Said, let's go stay at this monastery for a week if they'll take us. And so we stayed at Dormition Monastery the first week of December 2008. I have lots of wonderful memories from that. I didn't know who Father Roman was. It was just like old crazy guy is what I thought. And so Wednesday morning, got there I think on Sunday afternoon. Wednesday morning after liturgy, after breakfast, by the dinner bell, by the lunch bell, if you're familiar with the monastery grounds. I run into Father Roman, and Father Roman says to me out of the blue, he says, we need a priest here. At that time I was a deacon. I said, well, it turns out I did know that because I know the priest in Albion, and he told me that you need it. So Father Roman starts talking to me as if I were the priest at the monastery. And I finally interrupted him and said, no, you don't understand, I'm a deacon. I'm not a priest. He said, that's not a problem, they'll make you a priest. And then he starts describing, now my wife is standing right next to me, he starts describing what our life will be like at the monastery without ever referring to us. What it's like to live at the monastery for an older couple. And it's like, how did he know? Like, he's just describing us. He's just describing our life. He's never met us. I don't know who this, and I think this is really strange for a crazy old guy. And it went on, and it was obvious that he was talking about us, but he wasn't saying, I'm talking about you. And so I was saying things like, I don't know any Romanian. He said, that's not a problem. The nuns will do the Romanian. And I said, like, I don't know how to be a priest. The nuns will teach you what you need to know. And so it was obvious that he knew that he was talking to me about becoming a priest at the monastery, but he wasn't ever saying that. But I was responding to him as if he were saying that. And he was telling me to stop the worrying, like, it'll all be okay. And so I had that, my opening experience with him was that, like, whoa, this is too strange. Like, how did you know those things? And then one final story, because there are those moments where God gives us something that really determine our life. They're the story that defines what our life is going to be like. And, this is, some things are kind of embarrassing about our lives, but I will tell you this last story because it was Father Roman's gift to me. It's the defining feature of my life for all the sins that are in it. So Saturday morning, summer of 2009, I've been a priest for 3 or 4 months. The Matins is over, we're doing hours. Pretty soon liturgy is going to all start. We've got to open the curtain, there's these people there. And I'm not petrified, but just like, anxious, worrying. So I go to Father Roman and I say to Father Roman, Father, how do you stop thinking about what other people are thinking of you? How do you stop thinking about other people? And immediately, as if he knew what I was going to say, he said, oh, Father, oh no, I didn't say thinking. I said, yeah, I said thinking. How do you stop thinking about what other people are thinking about you? And he said, oh, Father, nobody's looking at you. Strangely, nobody's looking at me. And I'm thinking, a characteristic of Father Roman is he would say some line like that, and then there would be a pause. I have a zillion stories about that, okay? But there was this pause, and I'm thinking during the pause, what do you mean nobody's looking at me? There's like 40 people on the other side of that curtain. We're about to open it. I'm about to make my customary mistakes, and they're all going to know about them. And like, I'm on total display, and like, are you crazy? What do you mean nobody's looking at me? Everybody's looking at me. And this is all in my head. I didn't say anything, of course. And then, after he let me do my turning, he said, the only one who sees you is God, and God is looking at you from within your heart. Explore the inner universe. That became the characteristic thing. How do we overcome vainglory? How do we overcome this overwhelming sense of people, what we think we know, people thinking of us? And a few months later, I was reading commentaries from St. John Chrysostom, and he was on the second coming, and the sun and the moon will be lose their light, they'll go out and they'll be darkened, I think it says. St. John Chrysostom says, well, okay, it's not really they're going to be darkened. It's that when Christ comes back, he'll be so bright that you won't see the light from the sun and the moon. And I wrote, whenever I read things and Father Roman resonates, I put FR in the comment. My books are filled with FR. Because that was Father Roman. He's the one who said that. You can attribute it to St. John Chrysostom if you want, but Father Roman said that. Because that was it. That's what he meant. He didn't mean that nobody was looking at me. He meant if you became aware of Christ in your heart, you would see only him. And that light would be so bright that you wouldn't notice that. And then it all clicked. That's exactly how you live your life. That's how you know that you can just live with this tremendous freedom and joy and delight because you are so vividly aware of Christ in your heart. He had 3 different levels of the Christian life, and the middle level, which he said that he had attained, is the constant awareness of Christ in your heart, which manifests itself as joy. And he was constantly aware of that. He came in one Sunday morning, early spring day, and I'm just getting vested, and he said, you'll like this, but except for you won't like my pronunciation. He said, the birds are all Greek this morning. And I was like, what are you talking about? He said, yeah, they're all singing, Kiriki, Kiriki, Kiriki. And like, the day of the Lord, the day of the Lord. And there's no doubt in my mind that he was right. Like, he heard them the way they were. One day we walked out, Wednesday morning we walked out, and he was like a 3-year-old. How do those robins know where the worms are? Like, he wanted to know, he didn't want to know, scientifically how. He was just amazed. All those robins are eating those worms. How do they know where they are? They're underground. How do they? So one of Father Roman's favorite sayings is that monks are children with beards. And he is the perfect instance of a child with a beard. This is absolutely, you know how when a little infant or a baby gets brought into the room, everybody lights up, everybody smiles. That's exactly how Father Roman was. He walked in the room, everybody smiled, because they just knew he had this childlike delight. So the stories could go on and on and on. I think that's probably a good place to end. What was characteristic is that he knew what I needed to hear in many different, I have 80 or 90 stories, and so, but those are the ones that give you at least some flavor of Father Roman, and the ability to sort of be on the inside and let that be what emerges as a word for what people needed, not what he wanted them to hear, but what God put in his heart for them to hear. So, thank you. I'm happy to answer questions or to listen to other people's stories, or not, as the case may be. Nobody's ever stood up for me before except for to leave, so that's okay if you want to leave.
Father Roman said that you look in your heart and the person's there. How does one go about that?
Yeah, that's a big question. So the question is to repeat for whoever's on the microphone. The question is, exploring the inner universe, how does that happen in practice? Well, it turns out that on Saturday I'm giving a talk called Exploring the Inner Universe, Practical Suggestions. It's a women's retreat, but non-women come. And that will be posted on our website. First, calm the body. So don't go to the refrigerator, don't go to the gym, don't fiddle with your phone. You got to calm the body, you got to go to the prayer corner. And when you calm the external storms by taking yourself away from all the distractions, you'll notice that the internal storms rage often. Sometimes you'll get a deceptive sense of calm, but usually in time they'll rage because all the stuff's on the inside. And you'll be inclined to think, oh, what's the use? I'm not paying attention to my prayers at all. I might as well just go have my cup of coffee or make my eggs. That's the mistake, okay? Because all of this we're purified by a refiner's fire, okay? And our God is a consuming fire. When we place ourselves in the prayer corner, when we go in the closet, shut the door, only with our Father who sees us in secret, we're in the refiner's fire. When we're calling upon the name of Jesus and Jesus is present, we're in the refiner's fire. It's supposed to be hot. The impurities are supposed to come to the surface. If I see the impurities and think I'm wasting my time, then I go to some distraction, because what's the use? But you're thwarting the very purpose. You think you're so pure that no impurities are going to come to the surface when you're in the presence of God, but we all do that. We all just think, we just get discouraged. And we're in the process of God transforming and changing us, and we think that we're on the wrong road. So we totally misinterpret our experience. And so you have to stay in the furnace or in the fire as long as you can stand it. Okay? Or the length of your prayer time, whatever. All right? And while you're in that, and the dross is coming to the surface, which are always in the form of distractions, anxiety about this, fear about that, anger about this, criticism about that, whatever, they'll all come up as God thinks we're ready. We have to not run from it. We stay there with it. And we ask Christ to come and be a part of it. Because that dross, that sin, that passion, is my death. The consequences of sin is death. The wages of sin is death. Death is the turning away from God. God's the source of life. So God just revealed to me the death in me. And the only way that death in me can be healed is if I'm crucified with Christ. So I don't try to run from that dross. I say, Christ, will you come and be crucified? Will you come and die with me? This anger that I feel toward so-and-so is what nailed the nails into your hands. I want you to come and die with me now. And you stay in the furnace as long as it takes for Christ to die with you and you to die with him. And then you are co-crucified, and that dross is gone. Gone forever. Now, it's pretty deep, and so next time you get in the fire, other things are going to come up. That's it. And so inside of us is all of the passions. Jesus tells us they're going to come out, the anger, the envy, and the like, and the kingdom of God. And the kingdom of God is kind of encrusted around all these. So occasionally we get a little glimpse here and there, but to be honest with you, we don't know what we're looking for. We don't recognize it. So don't go around, if you look inside, you're going to see crud. And if you think you see something good, it's probably deception. I mean, there is lots of good in there, but you're just like, we don't know how to see that yet because we're so blind. And if you don't think you're blind, you are really blind. And Jesus makes that clear in John chapter 9. The characteristic of physical blindness is that you run into things, but at least you know you're blind. The characteristic of spiritual blindness is that you don't think you're blind. So if you want to be 100% certain that you are spiritually blind, say, I'm not blind. And now we know you're blind. And so don't think that you're going to see the kingdom of God when you look inside. You're going to see a bunch of crud. And you're going to stay with that crud, and you're going to bring Christ to be crucified with you in that crud. It's going to take a little bit of practicing. If you do it, you'll be frustrated for a year. You'll have some decent experiences in the second year. At the end of the third year, you can't imagine any other life at all. Like, why would I have ever lived any other life? Do it 10 minutes a day, every single day. You can't do it while you're driving the car. You can't do it while you're washing the dishes. Go into your prayer closet, shut the door, calm the body, let the inner storms rage. Stay in that rage. Don't run from it. Bring Christ into it. Die with him. Just do it day in and day out. So that was pretty good. It's going to take me an hour to say that on Saturday. That's the sum total of the spiritual life, really. It's Romans 12, 1 and 2 also. Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you very much. We are so blessed to have Father John with us. I know you want to offer him your appreciation with a little applause. Please do that. We're also blessed to have Father Andrew Jarnowitzki, Presbyter Ruth, their son Adam, Father Deacon Spiro served with us today, and Father Michael came, and Presbyter Karen. So glad to have you here. And as some of you know, Father Michael's going to be our fifth speaker, so we hope that you can come again to hear him. Who is speaking next week, Father Presbyter? Anthony Linderman. Who might he be? Oh, your godson, yes, your godson is coming. And also, he's our dear friend, and we've known him for many years. But he's going to speak to us about Archbishop Anastasius Ioannolatos. You may have heard of his name, you may not. But I hope and pray that after you hear his speech, you'll say, I'm so glad I know about him now. I met him many, many years ago in Africa when I was, anyway, it's a long story. But he was just this light, a light to so many people. And then God chose him to serve in Albania, which was a very difficult assignment. But as you'll hear his story, he did, God worked wonders through him. We're going to close now with prayer as we always do, but the choir, by God's blessings, gave us the Lord of the Powers. Oh, the Aliotos. Thank you, Aliotos. Is there a plural for Alioto, or do you say Aliotos? Okay, Adam, I don't read music. You do. Could you please come here and lead us, because I don't read music. I'm going to mess it up.
He doesn't need the microphone.
Okay. Lord of the powers, be with us, for in times Anton igen Paterrimon Kirchus, Theodos Elesun, Kisos Animas. Amen.
Again, thank you very much, Father John. It was beautiful. I think a lot of people